All right, so we are going to be talking about what the Fed is and giving a little bit of a history about the Federal Reserve so that we can understand it a little bit better. I think it's essential to know what the Fed truly is and its history. So the Fed was created in 1913. It was created in the same year that the federal income tax was created, actually, which is a bit interesting. And one of the things about the Federal Reserve's creation was it was created in order to secure liquidity amongst banks in the market. Because JP Morgan Chase famously had to but provide more liquidity into the banking market, and I think it was like 1907 or something like that, so that banks could continue to lend and invest in different ventures and capital.
When you say secure liquidity, what does that mean? Does that mean that they go out and raise the liquidity?
Well, they
print it?
Print the money. So they literally print the money. Okay. And that provides more liquidity in the financial markets, okay, banking markets in particular. And so that's why the central bank was created. Probably the most important thing to know about the Fed, the Federal Reserve, is that it's actually a private bank. It is not a federal bank, despite its name. It is a private bank. It is not controlled by the American people. We don't elect anyone who serves at the Federal Reserve, and it's essentially autonomous. So when the Fed creates policy, it is doing so on their own, without our influence. It is entirely separate from the United States government. It is a private bank that controls our currency and our country and our economy. And so the interesting thing is the creation of debt. So for every $100 that it prints, in return, it asks for an interest payment back from the United States Treasury.
Right.
And that is, let's call it $1 for every $100. So every time they've created $100, they've printed it, they want back $101. You compound that over the trillions of dollars that have been printed, there's always that $1 that was never printed. It was never printed.
So where do they get that from, though?
Previously, it was through trade with other countries. So through excise, tariffs, duties, all those things. Trade with other countries, we had a budget surplus. We paid debt. Then, with the creation of the income tax, we now could pay that debt to the private bank through income tax.
The people
could now pay
that debt.
The debt. Gotcha. So the people, through the form of income tax, now pay the debt of the country to a private bank.
It's kind of funny that the people pay the debt to a private bank that is not governed by the people. That's very interesting.
It is interesting. And so the only time in United States history when we didn't have a national debt, coincidentally, was when Andrew Jackson got rid of the central bank. Andrew Jackson got rid of the central bank in, I think, 1833. And in doing so, he also paid off the national debt. And we didn't have a national debt for a little bit of time. Now, that actually caused a little bit of a liquidity issue, because it was all maybe done too fast, but it was the only time our nation didn't have a national debt. And its history was also when we didn't have a central bank.
Do all nations have a national debt?
That's a good question.
Sorry, I'm just curious.
I would say all developed countries now have
some type of
a national debt. Either, we're a large portion of the World Bank and the IMF. We all kind of interact with each other. And so one of the fears that's out there is that we will lose our reserve currency status. And what we've seen, and part of what we discussed in our last video about Jerome Powell's stance, is faith in the currency being most important. Most people, most countries have returned to the United States currency as their reserve currency.
I think you mentioned close to like 60%.
60%, exactly. About 60% right now, the world is still holding the United States dollar as their reserve currency.
Gotcha.
So faith in the dollar is based off of essentially people holding it as their reserve currency. We're doing better, despite our inflation and our craziness, than a lot of the developed world. Not all, but a lot.
Right.
And so people still have faith in the United States currency. So the concern, and this was talked about by Thomas Jefferson, he thought that central banks favored the rich more than like farmers. And so I have a quote here that I want to discuss. This is from Thomas Jefferson. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered.
It's basically what's happening in California with their property. The homeless population's going
Do you feel a sense of that coming true?
Absolutely.
It's interesting that, in our last video we talked about Invitation Homes getting ready with $1 billion to buy up property across the country when they already own 85,000 homes.
Right.
There's major institutions, private equity firms, major players in the game that are loaded, that own the world, and they're going to own more.
One, because they already have cash available. Two, because they're able to get from these banks additional cash at a very cheap amount. Is that correct?
Yeah. And this is why Thomas Jefferson talked about it benefiting the rich more than farmers.
Right.
Is because they get first access to it. They're the bankers, they're the institutions. They're getting the capital at, over the last few years at 0.5% or 1%, these crazy numbers. And then they would lend it out to us at what we thought was ridiculously low numbers, 3%.
3.5,
There's still that margin that they're making on every dollar.
Yeah.
So they're getting it essentially for free. They're handing it down to us, or they're buying assets with it competing with us, the American people, of purchasing our own stuff and building our own wealth.
Yeah.
And so it's becoming more and more difficult for the American person, the American family, to build wealth because we're competing against banks and private equity firms and institutions. And it's in large part due to the Federal Reserve's policy and existence in general.
What's the goal of these companies? Why do they need to own even more?
I think that's a really good question. They're publicly traded companies in large part. So they're trying to secure growth in return for their stockholders, which is fair. And I think a large part of this is that it's an incentive structure that we're currently existing in. I don't know if you can necessarily call these people evil for wanting more or that they're doing wrong for wanting more.
I think any of us, if we were to figure out a system that continued to work, you just keep applying that system.
So it's not that they're acting immorally necessarily. It's that the system that has been created for them is letting them do it. So I don't know if they're malevolent. I think it's more that we're in a broken system. We're living in a system that is highly beneficial to elites who have access to money and not the American people.
It values them over the American people, or structured that way.
So the big concern is that as the Fed continues to tighten now, as the Fed continues to restrict money downline, the people with capital who have already built up enough wealth are going to continue to purchase things en masse. And the American people will be left tighter, with less money, and with less pathway forward.
You're going to see a lot more cities become New York and California,
San Francisco,
where it's very unaffordable for the average person.
Yep. So we're going to be talking about this stuff more so that you remain informed, so that you can make decisions that empower you and empower the American people. We need to have this knowledge so that we can counteract what's happening. And we're united. And if we realize what the real issues are, we can rally around them together. And that's our goal.
If you were to give 3 tips that could help American people, what would it be?
Think locally.
Okay.
That'd be my only one.
What do you mean by think locally? Like politically think locally, or
Everything.
everything?
I think that we're so divided on things that we don't need to be divided about anymore.
Yeah.
And the real truth is, it's the American people versus power elite.
Right.
It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's not left versus right. It's not black versus white. It's us. All of us versus elite. Mm-hmm. It's the American people versus authoritarian rule. Mm-hmm. And if we come together locally, if we look at commonality, if we look at things that can unite us, we start to financially invest in each other. We start to take care of each other. Mm-hmm. If you're in need, your family's in need, let's look to each other first before we look to other people.
And by that,
in the
we
federal
become
government.
a lot more powerful as a group of people.
As a people.
Yeah.
And secure, too.
Yeah.
Because we know we can rely on our community. So that's one of the things that Mike and I talk about a lot, actually, is one of the focuses of our team in general is if you need something, you come to us. You're a member of our community. You can always rely on me and Mike. Always. And we will be here for you. And change begins with us and in our families and our home. And we have daunting tasks in front of us. Big, giant problems, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. And it almost seems insurmountable because you're looking at things that are too large for you to control on your own. But I guarantee you, if you begin to focus all of your energy, all of your efforts, all of your attention on one thing that you care most about, you can make a huge difference. And you'll have me and Mike and hopefully your community on your side.
Yep.
I love you guys. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one.